So welcome. So I'm going to be talking sort of an overview of grants and how to approach them. So the first thing you sort of have to ask yourself is, why do we write grants? So sometimes it seems like a simple thing, but you know the real reason we write grants is so that we can do our research and discover new things. And it also allows us to have protected time in order to do that, because research takes time. It gives us a real opportunity to be creative. So, you know, when you sort of open your mind and start thinking about new ideas and taking that time to write a grant, it's an opportunity. It helps us organize our time and our ideas and our thoughts. Sometimes people have a tendency to jump into doing even research projects without really thinking about what it is that they're trying to accomplish. Writing a grant helps us organize. It can help us find new collaborators for novel ideas and learn new things. It's necessary if you're in an academic institution. If you want to be promoted, you have to get grants, write papers, and support yourself. There's a lot of academic status associated with grants, all different types of grants. And then if you publish all of the work that comes from your grants and you're successful, then you can become famous. So there are several different types of grants to think about in terms of structure. The majority of people here are probably thinking about early stage grants. The most common are one-year grants. The Conquer Cancer Foundation has Young Investigator Awards, but other organizations have one-year awards as well. It's a good place to start. AACR, ACS, Komen, DOD, and a variety of the specialty foundations. Once you move on from a one-year grant, then you can start thinking about career development awards, which are mentored awards for junior faculty, most common being K awards from the NIH, but also various foundations have career development awards that are between 3 and 5 years to support you transitioning from a mentored investigator to an independent investigator. And then once you get past that point, you're 5 to 7 or 8 years out, then you can start thinking about independent multi-year awards. RO1s and PO1s are the most common, but there are a whole variety of different mechanisms once you get to that point in terms of requests for applications. The most important thing is to sort of figure out where you are in the process and what you can accomplish in the time frame of the grant, 1 year, 3 years, or 5 years, because you don't want to write a 5-year grant for a 1-year award. So when you're reading about grants, you have to think, what is the intent of the grant that I'm applying for? Is there a restriction for patient-oriented research, which is research conducted with human subjects for which you are directly interacting with human subjects, or whether or not it's related to epidemiologic and behavioral studies or outcomes research and health services. And it's important to read the application because some of them have very strict requirements. Grants can be focused on translation, sort of moving bench to bedside and back, and then there are basic science and lab-based grants. But some of the foundation grants will exclude lab only if there's not a translational component. So when you see the application, the most important thing is to read it and make a list of all the things that are required. Sometimes people just focus on the research strategy, and then, you know, the day before the grant is due, then they start to realize there are all these other things that they have to get done before they submit the grant. So whether or not the grant requires an IRB, protocol, abstract, whether you're going to be using animals. Some things take longer to get done before you submit, so you want to sort of map it out in terms of timing. Whether the grant requires a personal statement in terms of the applicant's biosketch, aims, research strategy, references, and budget justification are fairly standard. But often you need to get, mentors' biosketches, letters of support, institutional letters of support, and those things can take time, and often you have to write a draft yourself, so you don't want to be leaving all of those things to the last minute. So the most important component of a grant is the research plan, and that's usually divided into various sections, starting with the significance and background, where really the goal is to explain the importance of the problem that you're trying to address and how your proposal is answering an unanswered question, how your proposal may be critical to sort of fill in the unknown gaps, and describe what's been done and known to date. The next section is innovation, which can be really challenging because not only do sometimes reviewers don't always interpret this section the same way, but you really want to explain how the application challenges and seeks to shift current research or paradigms, why your study is needed, how your techniques are novel, but you don't want it to be so novel that it's seen as preliminary, and that you're not just adjusting a small piece to answer a question that's already known. So you really want to show how your work is innovative. The approach is really your strategy or methodology, how you're going to accomplish the aims that you've set forth, how you're going to collect data, analyze it, and interpret it. You want to discuss problems and alternative strategies and what your benchmarks are going to be for success and what your role is going to be depending on the grant itself. And then a statistical analysis section. This is really required for all grants, whether it's a basic science grant, an animal grant, or human subjects, even or grants that are data mining or health service oriented. Sometimes people don't realize that, but for the Conquer Cancer Foundation, it's a mandatory component, no matter what the nature is of the grant. Without that, grants will almost always be disqualified. So sometimes what we see is that the time people spend preparing is very different than the time the effort that the reviewers spend on each of the sections. So the most applicants spend about 75% of their time on background and maybe 15% on design and strategy. And most reviewers spend about 85% of the time, really going thoroughly through the design and strategy. Now, as an applicant, you need to know the field and you need to know, what the unanswered questions are. But, it's important to note that it's the design and strategy that are the most important components. And so, in terms of justifying the idea that you have, a lot of times people present preliminary work to justify your ideas. And that serves as two real purposes, that you can, that you've either done work in the area so that it's feasible, and it sort of gives you the opportunity to prove that you can do the work, but it also shows that your work is relevant. So you can really use this section to convince a reviewer that you're the perfect person to do the task. In terms of the physical grant, obviously you want to read the directions, as I said before, but you really need to pay attention to the way it looks. You want to justify the margins. You want to, you don't want to use teeny tiny fonts. Often there's regulations in terms of what fonts you can use, no fancy scripts. You want to make it easy for the reviewer to read. Know the audience that you're going to be giving it to, and neatness counts. I just read a grant where there was no space between the paragraphs, and it was really a lot of repetition, and it was almost impossible to get through. And within 10 minutes, I knew I wasn't going to give it a good score. Often career development grants ask you about yourself. And sometimes there's a limited amount of space in the application and the research to actually describe yourself. So aside from your own personal statement or career plan, there are other places where you can think of putting information in. In terms of the budget justification, you can not only describe yourself, but also describe other personnel with experience. In the resources and environment section, you can really show that the place you're at and the other people that you're working with have all the tools and resources necessary for you to be able to do your work. Your letters that you get should not just be about you being a nice person, but they should really enforce that the person knows you well and has faith that you're going to go on to be an independent investigator. And if you're going to do a protocol, you want to start to think about getting letters from companies that are going to be supporting your drug or your trial so that people know that you're going to be able to do what you can do. So just a little bit more about the mentor letter. It's not a recommendation. It really needs, it is in a certain sense, but there are real important components of it. It needs to have a mentoring plan, how often you're going to meet, are there other mentors, what are you going to be doing with your time to enhance your independence, are you going to be taking classes, are you going to be going to seminars, and what's the mentor's track record, how good are they? People want to support successful people, so they want to know that your mentor can do what they say they're going to do, and that your mentor's not overcommitted. So, you know, if your mentor is asking you to write a draft, you need to make sure that you know all this in order to write a good draft. The review process, grants are usually distributed based on expertise. There's usually 2 people that score it. You're going to go into this in much more detail later. And then everyone votes. And they vote based on not only for career development grants, this isn't really meant for you to read all these things, but you know, they're check boxes people have in terms of the things that they're looking for. They go by the strength of the proposal as well as the strength of the applicant. So steps to success. I would say that it's really critically important to pay attention to the details. To start very early, because the earlier you start, the more people you can have read the sections. And not just read your research sections, but read all the different components that, that you're going to be asked to submit. When you ask people for advice, not everybody's advice is good advice, and it can be really challenging to know what to include and what not to include. You don't need to incorporate every suggestion that's made, but you need to at least think about it and not be defensive to say that you're right and they're wrong. Your grants administrator is your best friend, because if you go to them the day before, they're not going to do all the work. Sometimes institutions have a lot of requirements, so it's a team effort. You need to learn really early who to get help from. And when you get the reviews back, even whether you get the grant or not, it can be really helpful. And there's not a person that doesn't get more rejections than acceptances. But, you really need to use the reviewer's comments to make yourself better or make the application better. Because even if you're right, but you can't explain it to the reviewer, that's a problem. And if you're not right, you have opportunities to fix your aims and goals. So the most important thing is to remember that it's not a chore. It actually can be fun. Getting it back's not always fun, but writing it's fun because it gives you time to get to be totally up to date in things that are going on in your field or in a field that's a very specific area. You don't always take the time to read all the articles that comes out. It helps you develop novel ideas. As I said before, it's an opportunity to be creative, to try to think of solutions to problems that are vexing. It allows you to collaborate with new people, which is exciting. And it lets you make a game plan for the next few years in terms of keeping yourself organized. I've done career development grants as, you know, right out of fellowship or during fellowship, as a mid-career, and then as a professor. And each time I had to write a plan, and it helped me think about what I want to accomplish over the next 5 years. So it helps you organize yourself. And the most important thing is that you can't take any of it really personally. It's hard to be criticized, but you know, sometimes the reviewers are right. But you just have to like take a day, have, you know, ice cream or buy shoes, and then move on. So.